off enough, I would probably add that into there as well, so that you get the goodies that you extracted out of the mead while it was in that hot boiling water.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I used to. I'm a bug freak, so I used to with the spirals, I would soak them in Everclear for just kind of dip them in 30 beats, take them out, and then toss them in the carboy. And then one day I just said, you know what? It's already 15% alcohol. Why am I doing this? So I figured, let me just throw caution to the wind and throw the spiral in there. And nothing happened. It was great. It did its job. So from then on, I just throw the spirals in. Nothing,
I've never had a problem one time, but I'm sure just as soon as I say this, we're going to have some people calling in saying, I did that and now my meat is sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't reach in with your bare arm to pull it out later. That's the problem.
Right? Yeah. Speaking of bare arms, do you guys remember, I think it's probably in the late 80s, there was a serial killer that would kill the people and he would cut them up and put their pieces into freezers and stuff at his house. His name was Ted Bundy. Do you remember that guy?
Yeah. Sure.
I heard today on the way coming home from work that they let him out of prison today, but it cost him an arm and a leg.
Nice.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, okay, never mind. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
All right, so do we have more questions, or should we move on with we're about halfway through, or maybe even a little bit more, so I can answer more questions, which I'm very glad to do, or we can go back to my outline and kind of move through that some more.
Let's move through that outline. I don't have any more questions.
AJ, do we have any more questions from our listeners at this point?
I don't think so. Squeak up if you do, and we'll get back to them.
I think there was one that we missed. Hang on a second.
Can you find it, Vicki, so we can make sure to answer everybody?
Jaden had asked a while back, and I don't think we really addressed this. Hardwood from a hardwood specialty store, not Home Depot, but like one of those places you go to buy nice wood for carving, that kind of thing. I don't know anything about how they treat their wood, but he was just wondering if you had maybe done that or if you knew anything about it.
They're probably more likely to know the pedigree of their wood.
They might. I would also think I've been a woodworker, made custom furniture and one-off cabinets and stuff for a long time. I would venture to say two things that might not make that work so well. One is that it's probably been treated, and then I also know that for sure they will generally kiln dry that stuff, and so that once they cut it down, they want to dry it up so it doesn't start to warp and get all stupid on them, because especially if it's expensive exotics. Mm-hmm. And so I think when my hunch, gut feeling is when they do the kiln drying, I think that might degrade and destroy some of the good things that we're really hoping to get from our wood. So I guess if somebody wanted to try it, they certainly could, although I think you need to for sure season it like we've already spoken of. And then I would also encourage people to make a tea first to see if it ends up being something they really want to use. Okay, so now we're going to look at the different species to see how they're different one to the next. Because people really want to know, well, okay, we've learned some stuff, and maybe most of it they don't even care to learn. But you really want to know, should I go buy some American or some French, and what's the difference between this toast level and the other? So I'll try to talk about some general pieces of each, and then very specific. American's the cheapest to purchase, at least here in America, and I'm quite certain part of that's because they didn't have to ship it from across the ocean to get here, right? Hungarian then is the second expensive, and French is the most expensive. And I think French has probably, most of your wine people I think French is probably what's used the most in the wine world, and so I think that they probably can charge a little bit more because of their history in the wine world. I like to think of American as being more of a piece for either the lower end sugars, like the vanilla, kind of toasty, and it really adds sweetness, in my opinion, at least at the low levels. It adds a very nice aromatic sweetness to something. We talked about how you could use the oak, and it will change the perception in your mouth and in your face and your nose, but it doesn't change the gravity, right? I found that light toasted and medium toasted American oaks will add some very nice nose that will make it seem to be perceived sweeter, even though it actually doesn't change your gravity reading. And it also adds a nice mouthfeel and a fullness to your meads. Up to medium plus, and then once you get to medium plus, we've now cooked those sugars quite a bit more, and so now you're going to get notes that taste like roasted coffee. If it's medium plus and or above, it's going to have some campfire pieces to it, and that's where it starts to taste. It'll change the profile of your fruit to more of a cooked fruit versus the jammy qualities. American has the least amount of tannins, and so it doesn't do a huge amount structure-wise. It's mostly for the nose, and it's mostly to add some low-level sugars that are very sweet and warm and inviting, kind of like, I don't know, cooking bread and cookies and stuff for Christmas. That's kind of how I look at the American oak. It's also got the largest cell structure, so it's the fastest for the infusion rate. It'll apply itself to your mead quite quickly. Now, if we go on to the Hungarian, it's the biggest spectrum from one to the other. The greatest is from American to French, and then Hungarian kind of sits in the middle. It actually has the tightest grains, and so it has the slowest infusion rate because of the grain structure. It tastes toasty and woody. There's some vanilla notes and some caramel. Up to medium toast, and at medium toast there's a lot of vanilla. And then if you go a little further, it starts to turn into coffee, the bitter chocolate. There's also some peppery notes there. And it adds a good bit of mouthfeel to your mead. And it'll also add campfire and coffee notes at the higher end of the spectrum as well. And also what's kind of unique to that is it adds a leather and a pepper notes that you don't find in either of the other two wood species. And so, you read the wine tasting notes when somebody's advertising their wine, and if they talk about leather and pepper, you can almost rest assured that that's coming from Hungarian wood there. And then if we move over to French, it's very complex. It has more complexity than everything else, and it also has more tannins. When they measure the different components of the wood, there's more tannins in the French. It's very sweet and woody. There's also a lot of spices in there, such as cloves and cinnamon and allspice. And it will add more mouthfeel than anything else. And it also adds a nice perceived sweetness level. And it also really accentuates your fresh fruits versus making it taste like a cooked fruit. So to recap on that, American oak is mostly a nose thing, and it mostly adds the lower level confectioner sugars. We're talking now the color spectrum from white or light all the way up to black. Imagine how that changes in sugars when you cook them. You're going to get the lower spectrum in the American and more nose than anything else. The French is by far the most complex with very much a lot of spiciness and cloves and cinnamon and allspice. And that'll give you a lot of volume for you guys that make session meads, or if you pick yeast that don't create a lot of polysaccharides, you have a very thin-bodied mead. You can add French oak to that, and that'll increase the volume in the mouthfeel by quite a lot.
Like for a short mead, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it?
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, my immediate question would be, it sounds like they're almost, kind of like hops, or almost in a way, the way that you were describing them. Would there be like I remember when I used to make beer many years ago, you'd have a bittering hop and an aroma hop. Can oak be used in that same way? Like, for example, if I want some of the sweetness from American oak and some of the tannins from French oak, would that be would I put like a little bit of each one? Is that something that's done?
Yeah, yes, absolutely, and I do that all the time. I call that layering, and I'll pick different toast levels and different species based on what I want to get from each of those, or what the different fractions that I want to add to my mead. And so you can absolutely do this layering thing when you're choosing this and for this reason, and then choose this for another reason. One thing I would tell you, Manny, at least to start with, and maybe forever, is rather than going, okay, I'm going to use medium French for the spicy notes, the cloves and the cinnamon and the coffee. I'm going to use some American to get that vanilla caramel piece going on with a nice nose. And I'm going to use some medium plus Hungarian to add some grip and some astringency to it. You might know all those pieces in your head, and that's great if you do. I would still say, at least for a while, maybe for a long while, and maybe forever, depending on what works for you.
Right.
I wouldn't suggest adding all of those different woods at the same time, because in doing so, you're not giving yourself a learning experience, right? Because if you add all those things, you go, wow, a lot of stuff's happened here, and big changes, but you can't specifically pinpoint this to that and this to the other. And so I would say add one and just leave it at the one until you get to where you think you filled in the gap there, or some people say we pick our ingredients, we pick our honeys, we pick our yeast to try to fill in gaps. Imagine if we've got a road and there's potholes in the road. Some people approach making mead and using their componentry to try to fill in the potholes to make the smooth road. Other people will say, don't do that. Find out what's naturally in your honey or what's naturally in your yeast, and then add your different components to try to support those things that are already naturally there to begin with. Right?
Make a wider, smooth road instead of a smoother road, right?
Right, and
keep it smooth.
And don't most of the time when we're tasting meads or we're judging a competition or stuff, most of the time, unless it's very subtle, and unfortunately those get looked over, I think. But I think in general terms, we flock to and we enjoy things with more complexity, don't we?
Sure.
When there's a bit of mystery and you taste and you smell and go, oh my God, this smells so good, and there's like 19 different things, and you taste and go, this is a kaleidoscope of flavor. There's 40 different things going on here. Instead of tasting and go, that's a one-horse pony. And so I like to think of all these different pieces to be adding a lot of mystery and complexity. So you're sitting there and you're tasting it and you're smelling it and trying to pick out all the things, and slowly, one by one, you can go, oh yeah. I was doing this with my son Sunday after a bicycle ride that we went on, trying to determine what entries I wanted to put into the Orpheus Cup, and I had one of my meads. We were both sitting there smelling it and tasting it, and we were actually filling out score sheets for the first time that I've ever done on my own stuff that I'm sending in to the competition, just to see, because I always think, well, do people think their own meads taste better than what they really do? And so I thought, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, I don't know. But if I take and fill out a score sheet for my stuff and give it a score before I send it in, and then I get my scores back from the competition, if they're hugely different, then that shows that we like our stuff with some personal bias, right? So anyway, we were
identifying your personal bias, though.
That's right, huh? Or maybe you say, like I did this weekend, I did this with a bunch of cases that I have had sitting around for quite a long while and hadn't tasted them for a long time, and so we opened up about 8 or 9 different bottles and found several things that I'm going, oh my God, this is just amazing. If I don't win some medals with this stuff, I'm going to be pissed or disappointed or whatever. And so now it's going to be fun to send those in and see what happens. But we were chewing on one mead for a while.